Fanalysis combines the data made popular in fantasy football with the latest sports betting trends to find you the sharpest angles. And for that, we bring in the lead betting analyst from Pickswise, Jared Smith. Jared, good to see you again, buddy.
Yeah, I mean, the season flies by, you know, 1/3 of the way through. It doesn't quite have the same ring to it as a quarter pole, but we'll take it, right?
So, okay, I'm glad you're giving us, we need a little perspective here on what is happening this season. Big picture, we're starting to see some trends emerge. And first and foremost is scoring is down. You even tweeted it this week that if you bet the unders for every game, you would have been pocketing some nice change this year so far. Why do you think that is?
60%. Yeah, 60% to the under this year. If you just woke up every day, did absolutely no research, bet every single under in the NFL this season, full game, you'd be up about $1,500. If you bet, you know, $100 better is doing pretty well. That's about a 20% ROI from what we're seeing based off of what you're risking every week. So that's really great, but that's not how we bet. You don't just blind bet trends. Every game has its own angle. Every game has its own matchup that you want to look at. But there is something to be said about the broader scope of football this year. I know you have some very specific data on fourth down trends.
Yeah.
But from what I'm looking at from my perspective, some of the odds makers that I touched base with this week, overall quality of play on the offensive side of the ball is down. Coaching, decision making, very volatile. That's leading to a lot of red zone flukiness. And then, of course, just when you're watching the games, it's not as exciting. There's not as many points. There's not as much back and forth happening. So I think there is a clear and definable trend so far, 6 weeks in. Again, only 33% of the sample has been calculated. A lot more of the season left. But right now, points have been at a premium.
Okay, so we're stats guys. We are, analytics guys. But I'm wondering if the analytics has come in and played too much of a role in what we're seeing in the NFL. Because I did want to touch on this. The big trend right now is that the fourth down attempts are way up this year, but the fourth down conversion rate is way down. Arizona Cardinals have gone for it on fourth down 23 times this year. It's absolutely unprecedented that these coaches continue to pass up free points down to the 25-yard line to try to go for it on fourth down. Do you think that the fourth down and the coaches may be diving into the analytics a little too much might be a trend that they need to reel back in? Even though we love analytics.
I think the analytics have a place in the game. I think more so in the explanatory way, where sometimes when we see something, and we'll get into the Giants-Jaguars game, perfect example this week, we see something on paper and we're wondering if the data behind the win-loss record matches what we see based off of the performance on the field. And again, in the NFL, it's all about what your Bill Parcells, your record, you are what you say, what your record says you are. So that's where the data helps. It allows us to find discrepancies from what the Giants' 5-1 win-loss record tells us compared to how good they really are. Now, when you get into decision-making, predictive analytics, which is what these numbers tell us and what they tell the coaches every week, I think there's flaws because those numbers aren't fully taking into account situation. They're just taking into account win percentage expectation if you go for it, or if you don't go for it, if you go for it and get it, if you go for it and miss it, or if you kick the field goal. So there's all these different tracks. It's like all these different alternate realities that the analytics tries to prepare yourself for. But at the end of the day, there's really no right or wrong way to do it. I think over time, analytics make sense. But unless you're by the book 100% of the time, then you lose that value. So coaches, I think, sometimes do outsmart themselves. They worry about what they have to say to the media after the game. It has become this kind of running joke in the league. Field goals and not going for it. Teams that are good at it, teams that aren't good at it. At the end of the day, you have to move the football down the field and you have to stick it in the end zone in order to score points. Teams that do that well, regardless of what down it is, eventually will rise to the top.
Predictive analytics are basically just like taking a peek into the multiverse. The question is,
exactly.
Which one are you actually going to be tapping into? All right, so let's get down to it. Last week, your best bet was against the Jags. This week, your best bet is for the Jags. The Jags, 3-point favorites against the 5-1 New York Giants. Are we betting that the Giants are eventually crashing? Once again, this seems to be a weekly conversation point.
And I have some interesting numbers to back up why the Giants aren't a good football team. But then you look at their record and you say they're 5-1. So clearly they've done something right. And we've talked about it last week. We had the Giants or the Ravens in our teaser against the Giants. And I don't know if the Giants really won that game or if the Ravens lost it. It keeps happening to Baltimore. Double-digit lead late in the game. Lamar Jackson snap goes over his head or fumbled it wherever it was. Instead of picking it up and just going down or throwing it out of bounds, he just fires it right down the middle of the field, late over the middle. Can't be those two things if you're a quarterback in the NFL. Gets intercepted, sets up the Giants with basically 1st and 10 in the red zone. Saquon Barkley does the rest, and all of a sudden New York's 5-1. But again, you dive into the numbers of who the Giants are, their defensive numbers especially, bottom 15, bottom tier team in EPA per play, bottom 10 team in success rate against the run. And then you look at their opponents, most of them all outside the top 20 in EPA per play on offense. So I haven't seen a whole lot of spunk for the Giants' opponents this year. And I think the running game of Jacksonville is formidable. We saw what they did to the Colts last week, just running up and down in that game. And the one reason why the Jaguars lost the game, they had a lead late in the fourth quarter. Matt Ryan hooked up down the field, Michael Pittman, Alec Pierce, ton of weapons, ton of explosion. It was one of Matt Ryan's better games as a pro. That's not what I'm seeing with Daniel Jones. He has the least amount of explosive throws down the field in the entire NFL. So if the same game script plays out, Jaguars run the ball early, physical at the line of scrimmage, defense plays well, they get a lead, I just don't see, Daniel Jones being able to explosively pass the ball down the field in the fourth quarter and come up with that lead. Again, the Giants won on Sunday because Lamar Jackson set him up with 1st and 10 in the red zone. Trevor Lawrence has been turnover happy, but I don't think that's going to happen this week.
Yeah, it's not only getting the turnover, it's where you get the turnover. And we're going to take a deeper dive into that Giants game in our next segment. But I do want to get to the Niners. 2.5-point home dogs now to the Chiefs. San Francisco this week took a big swing and traded for Christian McCaffrey, one of the most explosive players in the entire NFL, though Kyle Shanahan says it's still up in the air if he's going to play. Should we count on him? How will that impact the game if he does play?
A little line movement towards the Niners on Thursday night, after that trade was announced. Not a lot, about 0.5 point. The number was already trending back down. So what we see most weeks is line open, especially with these pick'em games. And this game actually did open a pick'em over the summer, and it reopened Kansas City -1.5 last week. What did we see last week? Well, Chiefs played well, right? And we didn't see the Niners play very well. So you expect the line movement to dip towards Kansas City. It did. It got to 3. And that's where usually the sharp money will step into a market. When you go from a pick'em, look ahead, way back in the summer, to 3, that's usually where the dog money will step into the market. It did. We saw a little buyback towards 2.5, especially when a positive injury report came out for San Francisco. Ton of guys on the Niners injury report. Bosa, Williams, Ward in the secondary, some other pieces as well. So we got some positive injury news for San Francisco. Buyback towards 2.5. Then Thursday, we hear the McCaffrey news and we get to 2. I don't think it's going to move much past that. I don't think McCaffrey will have a huge impact in this game. I really think the key is how healthy is the Niners secondary against Patrick Mahomes. I could poke some holes in Patrick Mahomes' game this year. Overall, the numbers have been great. But what do we talk about? Analytics. Early down success tends to be slightly more predictive. Patrick Mahomes' early down numbers are well below his expectation and well below where he is on late downs. He's the top most efficient passer in the league on late downs, 3rd and 4th down this season. But on early downs, we haven't quite seen it. So I could see San Francisco's defense getting into the Chiefs a little bit here, especially if they're healthy. And on the other side of the ball, Jimmy Garoppolo, this is a spot he has shined in. 13-3 against the spread as an underdog. Very feisty dog in his career. And I like the Niners offense overall, even without Christian McCaffrey. I think Garoppolo Buffalo can push the ball down the field. The Chiefs have some injuries in the secondary as well. I think if you can find a 3, probably not, but maybe a 2.5, decent bet towards the Niners here as a home dog.
Well, I think if you were to look at some of the stats, I mean, why he's so good on some of the later downs, the third down, a higher percentage of extra man being sent is on third down. And right now, Patrick Mahomes is second in the NFL in passer rating when there is a blitz coming. So that's where he succeeds the most. The Niners clearly the #1 defense right now in the NFL. But against the Chiefs, when you look at the numbers, Mahomes last week threw for 336 yards and 2 touchdowns against the Bills team, but they only put up 20 points. You have to imagine that the Niners had to learn something from what the Bills did defensively this week.
The Bills play a lot of zone, and they were without some of their best secondary pieces. I'll be honest, I think the Niners defense is better than Buffalo's right now at the moment. If you put everything in a vacuum, I really like DeMeco Ryans. I think he's a little bit more aggressive as a head coach and a defensive coordinator. McDermott, I would lean a little bit more on the conservative side. I think San Francisco's got more talent on the defensive end. With Bosa and with that secondary fully healthy, I do think they can give Patrick Mahomes problems. Here's an interesting one, too, and I don't want to read too much into this because it's a small sample size, but I think it does speak to where Kansas City is right now. We view the Chiefs as there's no lead safe. If they're behind, they're going to come back and win. Well, 10 drives this season with a 1-score lead, tied, or 1-score deficit. Of those 10 drives, they've only scored 3 times.
Wow.
Only 1 touchdown, too. So I think there's some, I don't want to say, regression happening because Mahomes' numbers are still very good, but he's thrown 2 game-ending interceptions this year. They have struggled a little bit in those key moments in the fourth quarter. And I think this entire game will be played like a key moment. Super Bowl rematch, very intense Super Bowl nonetheless a few years ago. So I like this game from a watching perspective. If you can get 3 with the Niners, I really like it from a betting perspective.
All right, Jared, we're going to be taking a deeper dive into the Giants game in our other segment. And Jared will also tell us how he really feels about the Jets this week. For Jared Smith of Pickswise, I'm Steve Overmyer. This is Fanalysis.